Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi everyone, my name is Nabila Dwi Apriliani from Group 6. Here I will explain the material about the hypothesis in quantitative research. I will explain the material page 81 until 85. The hypothesis in quantitative research. The following are additional examples of hypotheses in educational research. 1. Boys in elementary school achieve at a higher level in single-sex classes than in mixed classes. 2. Students who complete a unit on problem-solving strategies will score higher on a standardized mathematics test than those who have completed a control unit. 3. Middle school students who have previously taken music lessons will have higher math aptitude scores. 4. Middle school students who have siblings will be more popular among their peers than students who don't have siblings. 5. Students who do warm-up exercise before an examination will score higher on that examination than those who do not. 6. Elementary school children who don't get adequate sleep will perform at a lower level academically than will their peers who have adequate sleep. Hypotheses are tools in the research process, not ends in themselves. Studies are often undertaken in areas in which there is little accumulated background information. A researcher may not know what outcome to predict. For example, surveys that seek to describe the characteristic of particular phenomena or to ascertain the attitude and opinion of group often proceed without hypothesis. Purpose of the hypothesis is in quantitative research. Principal purpose served by the hypothesis include the following. 1. The hypothesis brings together information to enable the researcher to make a tentative statement about how the variables in the study may be related. 2. Because hypotheses propose tentative explanation for phenomena. 3. The hypothesis provides the investigator with a relation statement that is directly testable in a research study. 4. The hypothesis provides direction to the research. 5. The hypothesis provides a framework for reporting the findings and conclusion of the study. Suggestion for delivering hypothesis. A study might originate in a practical problems. In some observed behavioral situation in need of explanation in previous research, or even more profitable in some educational, psychological, or sociological theory. Thus, researchers derive hypotheses inductively from observation of behavior or deductively from theory or from the finding of previous research. Induction and deduction are complementary processes. In induction, one starts with specific observation and reaches general conclusion. In deduction, one begins with generalization and makes specific prediction. Deriving hypothesis inductively. In the inductive procedure, the researcher formulates an inductive hypothesis as a generalization for apparent observed relationship. That is, the researcher observed behavior, noticed trends or probable relationship, and then hypothesis and explanation for this observed behavior. This reasoning process should be accompanied by an examination of previous research to determine what findings other investigators have reported on the question. The following are additional examples of hypotheses that might be arrived at inductively from a teacher's observation. 1. Students learning of computer programming in the middle grades increases their development of logical thinking skills. 2. Using advanced organizer increases high school students' learning from computer-assisted instruction in chemistry. 3. Students trying to write summaries of a lecture will perform better on an immediate post-test on lecture comprehension than will students who simply take notes. 4. Children score higher on final measures of first grade reading achievement when they are taught in small groups rather than large groups. 5. The cognitive and affective development of first grade children is influenced by the amount of prior preschool experience. 6. After school tutoring programs increase the achievement of a student. In the inductive process, the researcher makes observation, thinks about the problem, turn to the literature for clues, makes additional observation, and then formulate a hypothesis that seeks to account for the observation behavior. The researcher or teacher then tests the hypothesis under controlled conditions to examine scientifically the assumption concerning the relationship between the specified variables.
Hello everyone, my name is Fadhilah Puspitaningrum. I will continue the presentation from my friends Nabila Dwi Apriliani. Here I will explain the material on pages 86 until 90. So the points I get from the following page are about verifying hypotheses deductively and characteristics of a useful hypothesis. Okay, verifying hypotheses deductively. In contrast to hypotheses formulated as generalization from observed relationships, some others are derived by deduction from theory. These hypotheses have an advantage of leading to a more general system of knowledge because the framework for incorporating them meaningfully into the body of knowledge already exists within the theory. A hypothesis derived from a theory is known as deductive hypothesis. They are useful theoretical examples from which educational researchers can construct deduction is Piaget's classical theory of the development of logical thinking in children. So, in a study designed to test a deduction from a theory, it is extremely important to check for any logical gaps between theory and hypothesis. The next is still continuation of the verifying hypothesis deductively. As for the example that show the proposition of several well-known theories and hypotheses based on each theory are as follows. Number 1 is the theory is achievement motivation by McClellan, 1953. People have a tendency to strive for success and to choose goal-oriented success or failure activities. So the hypothesis is there is a positive relationship between achievement motivation and success in school. Number 2, the theory is attribution theory by Weiner, 1994. People attempt to maintain a positive self-image. People explain their success or failure in a way that preserves their self-image. So the hypothesis is, if students are given a task and told that they failed or succeeded, even though all actually succeed, those who are told they failed say it is due to bad luck. Those who are told they are successful will attribute it to skill and intelligence. And then number 3, the theory is Theory of Multiple Intelligence by Gardner, 1993. People have a number of separate intelligences that may vary in strength. So the hypothesis is teaching science concepts using a variety of approaches will result in greater achievement than when using only linguistic and mathematical approaches and others. The next material is characteristic of a usable hypothesis. The following are the criteria for evaluating a hypothesis. Number 1. A hypothesis that's the expected relationship between variables. A hypothesis should conjecture the relationship between two or more variables. For example, suppose you attempt to start your car and nothing happens. It will be unprofitable to state the car will not start and it has a wiring system, because no relationship between variables is specified, and so there is no proposed relationship to test. A fruitful hypothesis will be, the car will not start because of a fault in the wiring system. Number 2. A hypothesis must be testable. The most important characteristic of a good hypothesis is testability. A testable hypothesis is variable, that is, deductions, conclusions, or inferences can be drawn from the hypothesis in such a way that empirical observation either support or do not support the hypothesis. A testable hypothesis enables the researchers to determine by observation and data collection whether consequences that are deductively implied actually occur. To be testable, a hypothesis must relate variables that can be measured. Make sure the variables can be given operational definition. Avoid the use of constructs for which it will be difficult or impossible to find adequate measure. Number 3. A hypothesis should be consistent with the existing body of knowledge. Hypotheses should not contradict previously well-established knowledge. For example, the hypothesis, my car will not start because the fluid in the battery has changed to cold, satisfies the first two criteria but is so contrary to what is known about the nature of matter that you will not pursue it. The hypothesis, the car will not start because the fluid in the battery has evaporated to a low level, is consistent with the previous knowledge and therefore is worth pursuing. So, in most cases, and especially for the beginning researcher, it is safe to suggest that the hypothesis should agree with knowledge already well established in the field. And then number 4, or the last, is a hypothesis should be stated as simply and concisely as possible. A hypothesis should be presented in the form of a concise declarative statement. A complete and concisely stated hypothesis makes clear what the researcher needs to do to test it. It also provides the framework for presenting the findings of the study. If a researcher is exploring more than one relationship, he or she will need to state more than one hypothesis. For example, if you were investigating the effect of a new teaching method on student achievement and student satisfaction, you will state two hypotheses, one for effect on achievement and one for effect on satisfaction. Furthermore, the term used in the hypothesis should be the simplest acceptable for conveying the intended meaning. Avoid ambiguous or vague construct. Use terms in the way that is generally accepted for referring to the phenomenon.
Hello, I am Endang Tri Lestari. I will continue the presentation from Ms. Fadhilah Puspitaningrum. In this video, I will explain about types of hypotheses, testing the hypothesis, and the quantitative research plan. Okay, let's continue to the material. The first material is types of hypothesis. There are three categories of hypotheses, that is, research, null, and alternate. The first is the research hypothesis. The hypotheses we have discussed thus far are called research hypotheses. They are the hypotheses developed from observation, the related literature, and are the theory described in the study. A research hypothesis states the relationship one expects to find as a result to a research. It may be a statement about the expected relationship or the expected difference between the variables in the study. Research hypothesis may be stated in directional or non-directional form. A directional hypothesis is stated when one has some basis for predicting a change in the state direction. A non-directional hypothesis, in contrast, states that a relationship or difference exists but without specifying the direction or nature of the expected finding. For example, there is a relationship between IQ and anxiety in children. The literature review generally provides the basis for stating a research hypothesis as directional or non-directional. The second is the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is a statistical hypothesis. It's called the null hypothesis because it states a negation, or not the reserve, of what the experiment expects or predicts. What is the point of the null hypothesis? A null hypothesis lets researchers assess whether apparent relationships are genuine or likely to be function of chance alone. The third is the alternative hypothesis. Note that hypotheses children taught by individual instruction will exhibit less maturity of mathematical concept than those taught by group instructions. Posits a relationship between variables and therefore is not null hypothesis. It is an example of an alternative hypothesis. The relation of null hypothesis is not positive evidence that the null hypothesis is true. It indicates that the evidence is insufficient and that the null hypothesis, the research hypothesis, and the alternative hypothesis are all possible. The second material is testing the hypothesis. First, state in operational terms the relationship that should be observed if the research hypothesis is true. Second, set the null hypothesis. Third, select a research method that will enable the hypothesized relationship to be observed if it is there. Fourth, gather the empirical data and select and calculate appropriate descriptive statistics for that here accurate by chance when the null hypothesis is true. Darwin, 1887/2007 wrote, "I have steadily endeavored to keep my mind free so as to give up by hypothesis. However, much beloved I cannot resist forming one on every subject as soon as facts are shown to be opposite to it. Indeed, I have had no choice but to act in this manner, for with the exception of the coral reefs, I cannot remember a single first formed hypothesis which had not after a time to be given up greatly modified." Page 293. Classroom example of testing hypothesis. Step 1. The deduced implication is stated as follows. Teacher positive comments on students' papers during a specified unit will result in higher scores on the end of unit tests for those students, compared with students who received no comments. Step 2. For statistical testing, the research hypothesis must be transformed into a null hypothesis. The population mean achievement score for students receiving positive comments, experimental group, will be the same as receiving no comments, control group. Step 3. After getting permission from parents or guardians for the children to participate, the teacher would select students to be randomly assigned to be experimental and control groups. Step 4. After completing the specified unit, the teacher would administer a common end-of-unit test to both groups and derive average mean achievement scores on the test for each group. Step 5. Inferential statistics can then be used to indicate whether any difference in mean achievement scores is real or is likely to be merely a function of change. The third material is the quantitative research plan. A research plan should include the following elements, that is the problems, the hypothesis, the research methodology, and proposed data analysis. The following list briefly describes in component. The first, problem. The plan begins with a clear statement of the research problem. A quantitative problem asks about the relationship between specified variables, include the rationale for the study, and a brief description of the background of the problem in theory and or related research. Second, hypothesis. A quantitative question is followed by a concise statement, the research hypothesis. Provide operational definition of the variables. The third is methodology. These sections explain how you will conduct the study. Include the proposed research design, the population of concern, the sampling procedure, the measuring instruments, and any other information relevant to the conduct of the study. Fourth, data analysis. Indicate how you will analyze the data to test the hypothesis and or answer the research question. Beginning quantitative researchers may find it difficult to write this section because they are not yet familiar with this statistic. The last for ending the material is the pilot study. After the tentative research plan is approved, it may be helpful to try out the proposed procedures on a few participants. The pilot study provides the opportunity to assess the appropriateness and to make changes if necessary. It also permits preliminary testing of the hypothesis, which may give some indication of its tenability and suggest whether further refinement is needed. Unanticipated problems that appear can be solved at this stage, thereby saving time and effort later. A pilot study is well worth the time required and is especially recommended for the beginning researcher. This is explanation from our group. I hope our explanation is easy to understand. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.